A common way to maintain your car is giving customers sticker shock. Some drivers are spending upwards of $100 for an oil change without any add-on repairs.
There was a time when changing your own oil was the easiest job in the vehicle. You pulled into the driveway, grabbed a wrench, and handled it yourself. That simple job meant you still had a direct relationship with the machine you paid for. Now, even that basic service feels like it is being pushed out of your hands. Plastic covers block access, fragile parts punish mistakes, and simple maintenance feels harder than it has any right to be. And when you can no longer do the smallest job on your own vehicle, it is not just the oil change that disappears. It is the beginning of the end of maintenance. So what does that say about car ownership itself? What's happening? For a lot of older vehicles, getting to the oil was not a mystery. You could get under the front end, find the drain plug, reach the filter, and get on with your day. The layout was not perfect on every model, but the job was visible. What changed is not that every modern vehicle became impossible, it is that more and more of them added barriers between the owner and the service point. Those barriers often start with the underside. Instead of clear access, you may find large covers stretched across the bottom of the vehicle. Sometimes there's a small service flap, sometimes there is not. Sometimes you have to remove multiple fasteners just to reach the place where the work begins. None of that sounds dramatic on paper, but it changes the feel of the whole job. The oil change used to begin with a wrench. Now it may begin with figuring out which panel comes off, which clip is reusable, and whether anything will break when you pull it down. That matters because most people do not fear the oil. They fear the extra things around the oil. A person who would gladly loosen a drain plug may stop the moment they see brittle clips, awkward screws, and plastic tabs that look like they have one good removal left in them. Once the job starts to feel fragile, people slow down, second-guess themselves, or give up. That is the real power of all this added packaging. It does not need to physically stop you. It only needs to make the job feel annoying and risky enough that many owners decide it is not worth it. The same thing happens with filter access. On older engines, the filter was often right there, hanging where you could reach it with a simple tool. Today, it may be tucked beside hot parts, buried behind other components, or placed in a way that turns a 5-minute step into a slow fight with dripping oil and limited hand space. Again, this does not mean the job cannot be done. It means the old feeling of a quick, honest service is gone. The job is now full of little frustrations, and frustration is one of the best ways to kill a maintenance habit. Once that habit starts to break, another problem shows up. The oil change no longer feels like one clear task. It starts to feel like a job where one small mistake can create a bigger bill than the service was meant to prevent. And that feeling gets much worse when you look at what happened to the oil itself. Because the fluid in the bottle is no longer the only thing you are buying. The oil became a code instead of a common item. There was a time when most owners thought about motor oil in a simple way. They checked the weight, bought a trusted brand, changed it on time, and moved on. That did not mean every oil was the same. It meant the decisions still felt understandable. A normal person could walk into a store, read the label, and feel reasonably sure they were buying what the engine needed. That sense of clarity is weaker now. Modern engines often ask for more than just the right thickness. They ask for exact approvals, exact standards, exact chemistry, and exact wording on the bottle. If the label does not match what the manual wants, the owner is left wondering whether the oil is merely different or flat out wrong. For experienced people, that may still be manageable. For ordinary drivers, it adds another layer of doubt. The job is no longer just about draining and filling. It is about getting past the fear that one wrong purchase could create a problem later. This matters because oil is supposed to be one of the most basic supplies in vehicle ownership. When even the oil shelf starts to feel confusing, the whole service becomes less welcoming. People start hearing terms they never had to think about before. They see more numbers, more approval names, more warnings, more debate. The simple confidence older owners had with a bottle and a funnel gets replaced by uncertainty. That uncertainty is powerful because it does not have to prove the owner is wrong. It only has to make the owner unsure. That is how a basic maintenance item turns into a form of pressure, Once drivers begin to believe they need exact dealer language, exact approved products, or exact shop procedures just to protect themselves, they stop treating the oil change like a normal task. It becomes something that feels official, something that has to be documented correctly, something where the bottle, the receipt, and the record matter almost as much as the service itself. And once that mindset settles in, the next design change hits even harder. Because modern oil systems are not only more exact on paper, in many vehicles they are also less forgiving in your hands. And if this sounds familiar, hit like and tell me in the comments if your car made basic maintenance harder. The filter went from tough to fragile. The old steel spin-on filter was not beautiful, but it was honest. It threaded on, sealed with a rubber gasket, and came off with a cheap wrench when the time came. It could still be over-tightened and people still made mistakes, but the design had a certain toughness to it. It tolerated normal human behavior. That matters more than people realize. Good service design is not just about how a part works when everything goes right. It's about how well it survives ordinary mistakes. A lot of modern vehicles moved toward cartridge systems with plastic housings or caps. There are reasons engineers can give for that change, and some of them are not fake. But from the owner's side, the result is often clear. The old job became less forgiving. Plastic threads do not feel the same as steel. Plastic housings do not inspire the same confidence. A part like that can work perfectly when handled exactly right, yet still make owners nervous because it feels easier to damage during a routine service. That nervousness is not irrational. Once a simple oil change includes a plastic cap with a precise fit, a special socket, an exact seal, and the possibility of cracking or cross-threading something expensive, the mood changes. A person who once trusted their own hands starts wondering whether this is the kind of part that punishes small errors. And in many cases, that's exactly how it feels. Not because the job is impossible, but because the old margin for human error is thinner than it used to be. This is one of the most important parts of the whole story. The old system was built around ordinary service. The newer system often feels built around careful procedure. That difference changes who stays involved. Someone with time, experience, and the right tools may still handle it just fine, but the average owner looking at a cramped filter location and a plastic housing does not see freedom. They see something delicate. And once the easiest service on the vehicle starts to feel delicate, the idea of routine ownership changes again. By that point, even if you do the mechanical part correctly, the job may still not feel fully finished, because now the wrench is not the only thing that has to agree with you. Maintenance became part mechanical and part digital. For many older vehicles, finishing an oil change meant tightening the filter, filling the engine, checking for leaks, and driving away. The machine did not need a second opinion. The service was complete because the work was complete. That clean relationship has become less common. In a lot of modern vehicles, an oil change is not fully done until the vehicle itself is told that it happened. Sometimes that means resetting a maintenance reminder. Sometimes it means working through buttons on the steering wheel, menus on a screen, or a sequence that has to be done in the right order. None of this sounds huge by itself, but it changes the meaning of the service. The oil change is no longer only a physical task, it is also an information task. The car has to be updated, the reminder has to be cleared, and the owner has to know the procedure. If they do not, the vehicle may keep warning them as if the service never happened. That creates another kind of pressure. The owner may do the hard part perfectly and still feel like they missed something official. The service becomes less about what was done and more about whether the system accepts that it was done. That is a major shift in mindset. The machine used to respond to care with clean oil and quiet operation. Now it also asks for confirmation. The dashboard becomes part of the service bay. This is where a lot of people quietly step away, not because they cannot turn a wrench, but because they do not want the extra layer of digital uncertainty. They do not want to wonder whether the reminder was reset correctly, whether the service record will make sense later, or whether the car will keep acting like the job was skipped. That fear does not need to be dramatic to be effective. It just needs to turn one basic service into something that feels half mechanical and half administrative. And when administration enters the picture, time itself starts to change.
because once owners are less connected to the job, they also become more willing to let the car decide when that job should happen. Longer intervals changed how people think about care. One of the smartest changes in modern maintenance was not a part, it was a mindset. Oil changes used to be treated as simple, frequent care. They were regular enough that owners stayed in contact with the machine. They were under the car often enough to notice seepage, loose parts, damage, and wear before those things grew into larger problems. That routine contact mattered. Then service intervals began to stretch. Better oil, better monitoring, better engineering, better systems. That was the message. Some of that was real, but the practical result was bigger than most people noticed. As intervals got longer, the habit of routine inspection grew weaker. Owners spent less time under the vehicle, less time with the hood open, and less time paying attention. The oil change moved farther apart, and maintenance slowly became something people thought about only when the car told them to. That changes behavior more than people realize. When service is frequent, people build familiarity. They know what looks normal. They know what a healthy underside looks like. They know if something starts to seep, sag, crack, or rub. When service becomes less frequent and more dependent on reminders, that familiarity fades. The car becomes more distant. The owner becomes more reactive. Instead of caring for the machine on a rhythm, they wait for the system to speak first.
There is another side to this. Modern engines are often working harder than older ones. More heat, more pressure, more complexity, tighter tolerances, and in many cases more stress packed into smaller packages. That does not mean every long interval is wrong. It means the old comfort of simple, cheap prevention has been replaced by a more calculated approach that many owners do not fully understand. The margin feels thinner, the service feels easier to postpone, and once postponement becomes normal, basic maintenance stops feeling like a habit and starts feeling like a recommendation. That shift sets up the final part of the story, because once the job is less physical, less frequent, and more system-driven, it stops being just a maintenance task. It becomes part of a business model. And that is where the whole picture starts to come together. The real loss is not the oil change, it is owner confidence. By this point, the pattern is hard to ignore. More plastic between the owner and the service point, more exact product demands, more fragile filter systems, more digital steps after the wrench work is done, longer intervals that reduce routine contact. None of these changes alone fully kill the driveway oil change. Together, they do something just as important. They make ordinary owners feel less sure of themselves. That loss of confidence may be the biggest change of all. Once people stop feeling comfortable with the easiest maintenance job on the vehicle, they stop imagining themselves doing anything else. They no longer see basic service as part of ownership. They see it as something other people handle. That has consequences far beyond oil. The person who no longer crawls under the car also no longer notices the torn boot, the wet seal, the loose shield, the cracked bushing, or the rust starting in a place that could have been cleaned and treated early. This is why this matters so much. It is not about pretending every old design was perfect or every new design is evil. It's about understanding what got lost when basic care stopped feeling approachable. A vehicle owner who can do small jobs stays engaged. That person learns the machine, notices changes, and catches problems sooner. A vehicle owner pushed out of those small jobs becomes dependent much faster. The machine grows more distant, costs feel more mysterious, service becomes something received rather than understood. And once that happens, the market around the vehicle changes too. The owner becomes easier to direct, easier to upsell, easier to move from one visit to the next. Maybe that outcome was not the only reason for every design decision, but it is the outcome all the same. The easiest job on the vehicle no longer teaches confidence. In many cases, it teaches caution, and caution over time becomes dependence. Which leaves one last question. If this is where maintenance has gone, what does that mean for the future of ownership itself? What happens when even basic service feels out of reach? A lot of people still think ownership means the same thing it meant years ago. You buy the vehicle, you maintain it, and you decide how involved you want to be. In theory, that is still true, but in practice, ownership feels different when even the smallest service begins with covers, special procedures, exact approvals, and a dashboard that wants confirmation after the work is done. The rights may still be there, the confidence is what starts to disappear. That matters because ownership is not only legal, it's practical.
It lives in habits. It lives in whether a person feels welcome under the hood, under the car, and inside the service process. When the oil change becomes awkward enough that ordinary owners stop doing it, the whole culture around maintenance shifts. People grow up with vehicles they are told not to touch. They learn to schedule instead of inspect. They learn to wait for reminders instead of building mechanical instincts. Over time, the very idea of routine self-service begins to sound unusual. That is the end of maintenance most people are actually feeling. Not a law, not a ban, and not some sudden event. It is the slow replacement of a basic skill with a managed system. The wrench still exists, the drain plug still exists, but the space around the job has changed so much that many owners no longer feel like the vehicle is speaking their language. The machine is still theirs, yet the process around it feels like it belongs to someone else. You can see the effect of that change in the way people talk about normal service now. Years ago, someone might ask which wrench to use or where the filter sat. Now they ask whether the job is even worth trying. That is a very different kind of question. It shows that the hardest part is no longer only the work. It is the feeling that the work belongs to a closed process. Once people start thinking that way, even simple care begins to feel like a favor they are asking permission to perform. And when basic service starts to feel like permission instead of ownership, the vehicle has already become more distant than most drivers realize. That distance is where many expensive problems begin, because distance always makes delay feel easier than it should feel today. And that may be the clearest warning of all. When the easiest job on the vehicle stops feeling easy, the rest of ownership follows it in the same direction. Not all at once, not with one headline, just a little more distance each year until people stop noticing what was taken away. The oil change did not disappear. That would have been too obvious. What disappeared was the simplicity around it, the confidence around it, the habit around it. Years ago, changing your oil was how many people first learned that a machine could stay alive if you paid attention. It taught patience, rhythm, and a little mechanical respect. It kept owners close enough to spot problems early and simple enough to believe they could handle more than they thought. That is what made it important. It was never only about the oil. Now that same job is often buried under layers of packaging, exact rules, fragile parts, and digital follow-up that make normal owners hesitate before they even begin. The service still can be done, but the design no longer welcomes the average person the way it once did. That is why this matters. When basic maintenance starts to feel out of reach, ownership changes with it. And once that feeling becomes normal, getting it back is much harder than losing it in the first place. That is why this matters to drivers more than most people admit. They remember when care was visible and honest. They remember when a service felt like time spent with the vehicle, not time spent navigating instructions. They remember when doing one job yourself was enough to keep you connected to the machine. Losing that does not only raise costs, it changes trust. It changes habits. And once habits change, the business of ownership starts leaning away from the owner. So that is the bigger problem. The oil change did not vanish, but the simplicity around it did. And once the easiest job on the vehicle starts feeling complicated, guarded, and not really meant for normal owners, the whole meaning of ownership starts to shift with it. That is why this matters far beyond one service. It changes confidence, habits, and the way people relate to the machines they spend so much money on. If you have noticed this on your own car, or if you think modern vehicles are pushing owners away from basic maintenance, drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy honest breakdowns like this, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more videos.